Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Jenna. I'm going to apologize on the front end. I've been fighting a nasty cold the past several days, so if I suddenly mute, turn off the video camera, it's because I've got a sneezing fit. But thank you so much for joining us today on our topic of examining of Western-based theories through an international viewpoint. My name is Laura Vaughn, and my co-presenter is, of course, Amanda Corso. So our presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about us and our positionalities, introduce the topic, discuss critical theories, leadership theories, and then what actions can we take. So a little bit about myself. I defended my dissertation, I believe about 2 weeks ago now. So I am now Dr. Laura Vaughn, and I'm currently at Florida State University. I'm a graduate assistant at the Leadership Learning Research Center, and I have over 8 years working formally in international education, even though there's been more than just that during my time. And Amanda?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Ray Corso. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a third-year PhD candidate at George Mason University in Virginia. I also serve as a graduate research assistant for Mason's higher education program, and I have about over 5 years, give or take, depending on how you want to slice it, in international education and education around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
All right, and so to share a little bit about what are we doing today, a lot of Western theories really has that focus on white majoritized male students and are not so inclusive of international students, especially when we look at higher education theories that maybe some of us may or may not have learned within our own master's or PhD programs. A lot of those theories were formed based on white male perspectives, and they do not include international students. They do not include a lot of students of color. So there's a lot of exclusivity that has occurred within Western theories, especially the slightly older ones. And because of this, and rightly so, international scholars do not always recognize Western theories to be applicable in non-Western contexts. However, Westernized influences are entrenched within education systems all over the world. If we look especially at global education, these have been based on and built upon Westernized standards. So we can't throw out Westernized theories completely, but we can deconstruct them and work to make them more culturally relevant to other populations who are not white males. And this process might be messy and complicated, but we can't just ignore the mess and act like it just needs to go away. We have to really engage with that mess and challenge it and see what can we do to make things a little bit better. And we also need to think about how do we work to create spaces to reflect on how Western theories can be culturally relevant while still working to deconstruct the Westernization of higher education and prevent a blanketed approach to research. So before we really go ahead and get into the presentation, we'd love it if you could introduce yourself in the chat. Are you a student, a faculty member, a practitioner? We'd really love to see who's in the space with us here today. So if you could take just a small moment and share. And while you're sharing, we will also go ahead and proceed with our next section.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura, for a fantastic introduction. And thank you to the folks who are introducing themselves into the chat. This is definitely a space where we want to engage in community. And so introducing ourselves, we thought would be a great way of starting that conversation off. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to introduce yourself. It's lovely to get to know each of you. To go into more depth about our conversation, I want to start off with talking about critical theories. While critical theories have made more inroads into the field of international education, we still see the critiques that we just talked about in regards to using Western-based theories apply to critical theories as well. For clarity, when discussing critical theory, at least in this context, we're referring to the theories that are used to expose and correct societal inequities and to identify the causes of said inequities. Examples of theories that have often been placed under the umbrella of critical theories include critical race theory, feminism, post-structuralism, just to name a few. Needless to say, this is not a list of all the theories that one might consider, but just a sample to orientate ourselves. Even when one reads scholarship about these critical theories, the development of the field of critical theory is often attributed to the likes of Karl Marx, as well as the Frankfurt School, all based within the Western world. However, we would like to complicate this narrative of who gets credit for the development of critical theory by thinking about folks and places often overlooked within critical theory conversations and corresponding critiques lodged against them. Next slide, please. Thank you. Namely, we would like to point that while, yes, much of how we have come to understand critical theory is Western-based, see again, Karl Marx, the Frankfurt School, the formation and the inspiration for many of these theories we use today all have, or also have, not all have, also some have historical and intellectual precursors beyond or in the borderlands of the Western world. For example, once again, engaging with critical race theory or CRT as a theory that falls under the umbrella of critical race theory, Kumasi in 2011 discussed how intellectuals and thinkers such as Tupac Amaru or Mahatma Gandhi influenced the scholars who eventually formalized the theory. The international ties can be expanded further when one considers that for many, CRT was a direct product to the legislation and shifts that arose from the civil rights era. Here we can see the examples of this movement being part of a larger global or international movement. For example, Kwame Nkrumah, a former prime minister and the first president of Ghana, was a leader of Ghana's fight for independence and influenced Martin Luther King Jr. in some of his approaches to the civil rights movement. In an LA Times piece written by Kimberly Crenshaw, she discussed how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a critical race theorist, even before, quote, there was a name for it, exemplifying the ways that movements and voices leading up and into the civil rights were influential to what we now have a name for, critical race theory. These examples demonstrate that even with frameworks deeply contextualized within, in this case, a US context, these roots are not strictly based in such localized areas, but are sometimes or even often informed by thinkers and paradigms from across the globe.
Sorry, since I'm a presenter, it's taking me a second to get the little bar down. All right, but so going into leadership, leadership is definitely a theory and a type of theory that is heavily Westernized. It's a concept that originated from Western ideas of a leader having very specific traits that might include being male, white, or having different systems of power. I mean, one of the first really leadership theory that was put together was the great man theory that said only great men could be leaders. And honestly, we see a lot of the time, like this theory still in effect even today, within a lot of the expectations of who society sees as a man or as a leader would be a man or somebody who is white or somebody who has a lot of money or power. And again, we see this in action even now today. There's also the trait approach, which said leaders have to have specific traits in order to be a leader. They have to be very engaging or very magnetic, that's certain type of personality, or they have to have certain skills. So the idea of leadership theories really comes from that very Western idea, but it's also the fact that many of these Western ideas have kind of permeated the globe due to colonization. And so there are cultures without the concept of a leadership process, which can make separating out leader from leadership more challenging than in cultures that do allow for this separation. So when it comes to leadership, the leader is a position. A leader is somebody who's in a position, that's a person, that's a role, whereas leadership is considered more of a process more of a aspect of um, the process of leadership where anybody can practice leadership. It's more open to a variety of people. However, there are many cultures when it comes to learning about leadership that do not really separate out the ideas of a leader from leadership. And so that can kind of make things a little bit more challenging when discussing leadership theories. And so that's also why it's very important to critically examine leadership through international perspectives so that dominant white male norms can be disrupted. Modern research and theories concerning leadership have worked to deconstruct and disrupt these ideas based on culturally relevant viewpoints. Now, I will say it's important to think about what is culture because the definition of culture can be more complex. Um, we have like the Merriam-Webster definition of culture saying, oh, it's a bunch of similar food and traits and things like that. But it's also important to remember that culture can be very complex and can really even differ on just micro levels within different what could be called cultural groups. It can be very complex even on that part. And an example of a leadership theory that works to be a little bit more culturally relevant is the culturally relevant leadership learning model, which looks at how individuals engage with the leadership process through their identities, their capacities, and their efficacies when within an environment that has historical legacy of inclusion exclusion, when there's compositional diversity, like is there compositional diversity within leadership? What are the type of behavioral dimensions, the psychological dimensions, and the organizational structural dimensions. So leadership theory has worked to be a little bit more culturally relevant in modern era. However, it's also important to note that the value of other styles of learning, such as those from non-Western backgrounds, have often been dismissed by Westernized education systems as less valid or have been tokenized. So you might have a theory that comes from a more traditional view from a country that is not Westernized, and it might be included in a presentation as, oh, this is us being diverse, when it's really just being tokenized or those types of discussions are not even included or brought in within conferences or presentations. And as a socially constructed concept, leadership can be reformed and changed, but it requires systems of power to be changed as well. And while we may see that sometimes within leadership education, the work has been started to make things more equitable and try to make leadership more inclusive, there are constant struggles with the more traditional views of leadership and leadership theory, such as the great man theory. But by changing the focus of leadership education from individualistic perspectives to one that focuses on the collective processes of leadership, this also works to help dismantle that westernized view of leadership.
Awesome. So, in light of these complications and different ways of thinking about critical and leadership theories and how they have been challenged, developed, and re/adapted, we found ourselves pondering the following question: what can we do? And came up with the following thoughts. The following ideas are not meant to be prescriptive, but instead encourage different ways of thinking about this, with these ideas serving as possible examples. So first, while examining Western-based theories, we believe there can be an adaptation to relevant cultural contexts. As an example of this can be seen with the use of the term feminism. The word feminism has been critiqued within some African nations as imperialistic and going against traditional and cultural values. Furthermore, feminism has also had a history of being viewed in a negative light within some Asian countries due to its association with Western ideas that were perceived as being individualistic and anti-family. Thus, rather than use the term feminism, certain countries and scholars in Africa and Asia took the ideas and adapted it into their own local context and values. Another thing to be mindful of, especially if one is reviewing scholarship, is jumping to conclusions. Instead, we encourage taking a moment to try to listen to why someone is using a theory. Controlli, in a chapter from the Critical Qualitative Research Reader, edited by Steinberg and Canala, talked about bricolage. It originally came from the idea of a person using the tools available to complete a task. Oftentimes, as researchers, even with the best transformative intentions, we are limited by different structures to operate using specific tools. Perhaps someone is required to use a specific framework or methodology due to their committee members while writing a dissertation. Or perhaps, in order to be published in a specific journal, a scholar felt compelled to use a Western framework to appear more legitimate as an emerging scholar in the field. Whatever the case may be, it is important to consider why someone is using a particular tool, in this case theory, and whether that might have been the best tool they had available to them due to the structural limitations. In light of that request, we as scholars doing the writing and presenting must be clear as possible as to that why. It is important to articulate why we choose a particular theory or framework and what we have done to the best of our capabilities to use that theory in a culturally relevant and responsible way. This takes careful consideration and ideally a dialogue with the community you hope to work with to consider whether a particular Western theory can be reworked or if it really should be thrown out. Another way of conceptualizing the use of Western-based theories is seeing them as a base, a jumping off point, and or a deconstruction tool rather than a final product of your work. Finally, we do caution folks, including ourselves, to be mindful of the ways our works may be recolonizing through our decolonizing. Good intentions, at the end of the day, do not negate the harm that has been and is continued to be perpetuated through Western-based research. As scholars and as practitioners, we are responsible for how we engage with these systems and should be intentional in our attempts and careful with the words and theories we choose to ensure that they are truly in line with the purpose of our work.
So,
And so,
uh,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Laura.
I was gonna say, I believe it's our time for questions, but we also have, if you don't have questions for us, we have some questions for you. Um, so if you kind of have seen some critiques about Westernized theories within international education, have you had reviewers or colleagues criticize your use of certain Western theories? What type of theories? And what do you think we can do to make Western theories more culturally relevant, if at all?